Tickets are now on sale for Icarus Fest 2023, taking place June 8th through the 11th at the William Carlos Williams Center in Rutherford, New Jersey. On multiple stages over 4 days, Icarus Fest will feature a packed lineup of dissident thinkers, journalists, comedians, and films. Our all-star comedy night is headlined by Kurt Metzger, with Rich Voss, Lou Perez, Danny Polishuk, and Dan Natterman. Festival goers will see the very best thinkers of the left and the right, including Max Blumenthal, Ben Burgess, Sam Husseini, Jeremy Kaufman, Jack Mason, Aaron Mate, Jeff Schollenberger, Meg Smaker, Michael Tracy, Jeffrey Tucker, Clint Russell, and yours truly. VIP ticket holders will be able to attend 4 special VIP events and hang out with the festival's speakers and comedians. For more information and to buy tickets and Icarus Fest merch, go right now to IcarusFest.com. That's IcarusFest.com. We'll see you there. This is the Unregistered podcast, and I'm Thaddeus Russell. This is a show about ideas, people, and behaviors that are considered inappropriate, out of bounds, or beyond the pale. The things you're not supposed to talk about if you're a school teacher, a college professor, a businessman, a politician, a parent, a neighbor, or even a podcast host. These are the things you're not supposed to say or even think if you're a good liberal, a good conservative, or a good citizen. Each week, I'll interview a person who has something bad to say. They might be a journalist or a professor. They might be a porn star or a drug dealer. They might just be an ordinary person with an ordinary job who doesn't care about the rules of polite society. I'm not interested in breaking the rules just to be a troublemaker. I'm interested in people who break the rules of conventional thought and to expand the scope of what is possible to say in our society. I'm interested in people who make me think. For many years, Americans have been taught to fear and even hate Vladimir Putin. But that's part of a much longer campaign in the West to demonize Russia and make it the other. I spoke with the leading expert on the history of Russophobia in the West to find out whether anything we've been told about Putin is true and whose interest all of this serves. This is my interview with Glenn Diesen. I am joined from outside of Oslo, Norway by Glenn Diesen, whose work I have been following intensely, I will say, for about a year now, whose work on Russia, Russian culture and politics, Russian foreign policy, and US-Russia relations is just some of the best I've ever seen. And unfortunately, and I'm told you this before we started recording, I mean, it most likely will never be seen in the United States. It's not directly suppressed or censored, but in a way it is. It's very difficult to find any narratives about the Ukraine war or about Russia that is counter to the dominant narrative. The algorithms or whatever suppress things like this. So this is one of the main reasons I wanted to have you on the show, is just to help broadcast these ideas into the United States especially. So your book, you have many books, you've written, I think, 10 books, but the book I wanted to talk about today, which I think is this your most recent book, last year, 2022, Russophobia?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, so it's a remarkable compendium of the history of the demonization of Russia in the West, and then especially of Putin in recent years. But I mean, the demonization of Russia goes all the way back to Peter the Great, in fact, and your book does a fantastic job of chronicling that history. But to me, this is the specific demonization of Putin over the last 20-something years. To me, I've been thinking about this a lot, Glenn. I think it might be the most successful psyop by the U.S. government in my lifetime. And that's saying a lot, because we're talking about a lot of psyops that have been conducted by the U.S. government. But the uniformity of opinion, and this is true in Western Europe as well, the uniformity of opinion about Putin and Russia is almost total. There is very little, as I was saying earlier, is very little room or space for people who have dissenting ideas about this stuff. And it is remarkable how all of academia, pretty much with just a handful of exceptions, academics working in this field, 99% of them, I think, basically put forward the line of the Central Intelligence Agency and the State Department and the Pentagon about what Russia is, who Putin is, and what we should do about it. The media, of course, is even worse. I mean, there is simply nothing in the mainstream media in Western Europe or the United States that will even raise questions about the value of NATO or whether NATO should have expanded or whether that had anything to do with the conflict in Ukraine. It is the first time in my life I have felt like I'm living in something of, and this is ironic, a Soviet culture. You can't find any dissenting opinions about this very important topic, which right now is bringing us to the brink of World War III. So there's just simply nothing more important to me right now than having people listen to you and read your work. And then there are other people in the alternative media. I found you through the Duran, and I watch the Duran every single day. And if more people watch the Duran in the West, we would not have a war in Eastern Europe. I am absolutely convinced of that. So, Glenn, that's my introduction. I'd like to talk about a couple of things, the history of Russophobia in the West, and then more specifically, what I have called the framing of Vladimir Putin. And by the way, I am no fan of Vladimir Putin. I really don't care one way or the other about him, but it's been obvious to me for many years now that there's been a deliberate, concerted, ongoing attempt to frame him as you say in your book, Satan, demon, the new Hitler, the new Stalin, whatever it is. The chief supervillain of the globe these days is Vladimir Putin. Turns out, and this is all chronicled in your book beautifully, that virtually everything we've been told about Vladimir Putin's misdeeds, nefarious activities over the last 2 decades is false, or at least unsubstantiated. From attempting to subvert democracies in Western Europe and the United States, Russiagate, the Hunter Biden laptop, the Russian Afghanistan bounty story. It goes on and on and on. The number of things that have been pinned on Putin and Russia that have been shown to be false. The poisoning of dissidents, political dissidents, and journalists. There's almost no evidence, or there's nothing but counter evidence for all of these claims. It's really remarkable that but still everyone believes it. When we talk about Putin in the mainstream media, we first hear about how he's poisoned dissidents and killed dissidents and shot down airplanes and has worked across the world to subvert democracy and overthrow elections, et cetera, destabilize other governments. So let's talk about first the long history of this, because it did not begin with Putin. It didn't even begin with the Soviet Union, Russophobia in the West. When did it start, and why did it start? What is the history, the deeper history of the relationship between the Western mind, and Russia?
Well, first, thanks for having me on. And part of the reason I wanted to write this book as well was because there seems to be a lot of misunderstanding about what propaganda is. At times, people seem to believe that it's just about lying, or also the concept of I saw the concept being used or misused to such a great extent that I thought was very strange, because the concept itself was deliberately propagandized. Because if you ask most people, like, who does propaganda, or what is propaganda? The first association will be, state media of authoritarian states. It's something that authoritarian states do. But again, there's quite a strong consensus in the literature that that democracies actually become more dependent on propaganda. Again, this was conclusions from Edward Bernays, Walter Lippmann, and again, it's not because liberal democracies are evil, but if you have a democracy and the extent to which sovereignty is transferred from leadership to the people, then it's the people who makes the decision, then it's a greater need to push them in the right direction, if you will, or to herd the group towards the right direction. So this is why the concept itself has been misused to a large extent, and this has very great consequences. And indeed, because of the propaganda of the Germans during the war, propaganda even got a bad reputation. Before then, people said they worked in propaganda. They tried to herd the masses, but because the Germans gave it a bad name, we decided to split it. So we called it public relations, or public diplomacy.
Sure.
That this is what we do, and again, this is also part of what propaganda is about. You change the language. You want to have something that we do, us versus them. So they have regimes, we have governments. They're aggressive. We're just assertive. They're provocative. We're just deterring. They're stubborn. We're principled. They do torture. We have advanced interrogation techniques. This is just how the language is reorganized. But yeah. So sorry, you had a specific question, so I'll just jump on it. I just want to add that because many people reacted to the title, which is Russophobia, which that has a literal meaning. The phobia are irrational fears, so it's an irrational fear of Russia, and I make it clear from the beginning of the book. There's rational reasons to be fearful of Russia. That is not the discussion. The word come from. The reason I focus on the irrational fear is because that's to a large extent what propaganda attempts to do. Propaganda doesn't appeal to reason. That would entail, for example, lying. Propaganda means that you're trying to convince an audience without appealing to reason. So you rely on human instincts. And the strongest instincts we have in for human beings is we organize in groups. It's us versus them. The group is where you find over thousands of years we organize in groups for security, meaning. So this is quite important, and this is what propagandists exploit. They manipulate the stereotype of who we are versus the other, and this is how you run propaganda. And sorry, so that's how getting to your question. Sorry for the long intro, but the reason why Russia is quite important is because we tend to always, the human beings, we divide usually into us versus the other, and because again, this is our strongest impulse, which group you belong to, and Russia has always had a very strong role as the other. I mean, you can only identify as, for example, white if there's black. You can only identify as tall if there's short. So you need to have us. You need an opponent to have other. So if you have West, you have East, and this is where Russia comes in, because they have been our other at least since the 1700s under Peter the Great, and the reason for it is because they fall under the old Orientalism, because they were seen as being Asians in Europe. So and this is because in the 13th century. After Kievan Rus collapsed and the Mongols invaded the Russian peoples, they lived they got stuck out of Europe for quite some time, and then it was Peter the Great in the early 1700s when he defeated Sweden. He effectively he brought Europe back to Europe. He brought Russia back to Europe. He was able to establish it on the Baltic Sea. It officially became like a European great power, became a maritime power. This was like when Russia became European, they Europeanized a lot of their culture. So it was a return to Europe, if you will, after being colonized by an Asian people. But from this time, no one in Europe, well, not no one, but Russia was never really accepted into Europe. And this is because they were seen as being effectively another an Asiatic people in Europe. And this is why when we define us versus the Russians, or who makes us, it always has to be in the mirror of Russia. And it's been now for 300 years, because we see ourselves as Western, they are Eastern. We defined ourselves as European, they were Asian. They are the barbarians to our civilization. We're the backward ones to our modernized nations. We're developed, underdeveloped. We're liberal. They're despotic, so we had this contrast. We kind of relied on Russia always as the other. So again, free versus enslaved, good versus evil, which is effectively what everything boils down to. Mm-hmm. And this is what we had all the way up to after World War II. How we saw Russia and us was always in terms of ethnicity. They were very barbaric, because they had a lot of Asian genes, and this is where the hordes, the Huns, the Mongols, rocking up at the gates of civilized Europe. So this is how they were always portrayed. Then during the Cold War, with this us versus them, it shifted from ethnicity to ideology. Mm-hmm. Now it was capitalist versus communist. We were the Christian versus the atheist, and democracies versus authoritarianism. Now after the Cold War ended, we decided not to create. We canceled the plans or the agreements we made with Russia to create a common Europe, and we instead decided to, instead of remove the dividing lines, we're just going to move them closer instead towards Russian borders, which is primarily the NATO expansion. Mm-hmm. And this redivision of Europe also demanded that we redivide, that we reinvent some of this us versus them ideas. And this is why everything now in Europe has to be seen through this lens of democracy versus authoritarianism. It's like a mental shortcut. Whatever happens in the world, any issue between the West and Russia, you can bet that the newspaper headlines or the articles will always refer to this or interpret it as some kind of a conflict between democracy and authoritarianism. For example, now we have this war in Ukraine. This is a huge struggle between democracy versus authoritarianism, versus tyranny. This has nothing to do with democracy. If anything, we have assisted in killing off Ukrainian democracy. So this is nothing to do about democracy. It has nothing to do with, for example, Putin. This is just how we frame things. And I won't go on for too long. But the idea that European unity has always been very dependent on this demonized Russian threat at the gate is very consistent. I mean, in the end of the 1700s, you had a Polish general who presented to the French ministry. There was this fake testament of Peter the Great. The argument was that Peter the Great was planning not just to take Poland, take the Eastern European countries, but the idea was, his fake testament said that they were continuing to expand towards the West. So this was quite interesting because the main idea was that the future of Poland was linked to France. This was the main argument. Mm-hmm. Of course, this was fake, but the lesson behind it remained that Europe must stay together if we're going to keep away these Eastern Asiatic hordes, these barbarians, the Russians. So, and we see this fake testament of Peter the Great always come up. So when Napoleon invaded Russia in 1812, he refers to this testament, like we have to defeat the Russians, otherwise, they have this huge evil plan to conquer Europe. When the French and the British attacked Russia in 1853 in the Crimean War, again, the same. They refer to this testament, which is fake. When Hitler invades Russia or the Soviet Union, again, they refer to this same testament, proven fake. Because this is who you have to attack them, and this is why we have to bring Europe together to attack the Russians before they come after us. But not only Hitler, but after that, you saw in the United States, President Truman, he also referred to this fake testament by Peter the Great, because this shows that the Russians will come and consume us all. So, and this was built into why we have to contain and confront the Russians after World War II instead of finding a common peace. And again, this has always been the repetitive thing. And what I found interesting is, before we started recording, we spoke a bit about George Kennan, and after the Cold War, he he argued that people in the US, when they were so eager to expand NATO, because he thought that this was a horrible decision. And in this interview in New York Times in 1998, he made the point that when you listen to the debates in the US Senate, like, he thought it was so detached from realities that that they had this vision in their head that the Russians just couldn't wait to just invade Western Europe. Like, this was built into their genes. This is what they had to do, and this is what why we had to expand NATO to prevent this. And he just said, this is not reality. And then he also made the prediction: if we expand NATO, we're going to threaten their security, then they will come with a harsher response one day. And when that day comes, we're going to start saying, well, this is why, the NATO expanders, that's how we refer to them, then they would say, well, this is why we have to expand NATO. Look how evil the Russians are. They always come to attack. They always come to conquer. But again, as Kennan pointed out, this is just fake. This is false, and as false as this testament of Peter the Great. But it's important to realize why this huge Russian hordes at the gates of Europe just has some insatiable desire to invade us all. That this is really very important at the center of their anti-Russian propaganda, because this is what incentivizes or gives there's a reason for European unity or Western unity. And again, this was a key problem after the Cold War as well. How can you Western unity if we don't have this Russian threat? And this is a problem.
Right. So the Peter the Great Testament you're referring to is this alleged document produced by Peter the Great upon his death that allegedly said that Russia would conquer and subjugate the rest of Europe. That's a quote from it. That's a quote from the alleged testament. Turns out that's all fake, and you're saying that it's been used, and you've shown that it's been used from 1812 all the way through the Cold War, all the way up to Harry Truman, citing this thing that didn't happen as a reason to confront the Soviet Union militarily. Now, what you're describing and what you describe in the book and what I have seen, to me, looks like racism, anti-Russian racism. I don't see any difference between the prevailing attitudes toward Russia and Russianness and Russians and prevailing attitudes toward African Americans in the 19th century in the United States. They are both considered to be, as you said, considered to be biologically, genetically predisposed to aggression, imperialism, expansionism, hostility to democracy, authoritarianism. It's in their genes, it's in their bones, it's in their blood, we believe. And this is what we see now. Now, in 2023, on MSNBC and CNN, you see commentators on the Ukraine war refer to Russians as orcs and get cheered for it. We just look around, look at the way people are talking about Russia nowadays. It's very much the same. And would you say it's a kind of racism?
Yeah, well, the ethnic component, the ethnic component lasted all the way until World War II. If you read the quotes by, General Patton and all, they all, refer to or even Keynes, all these, key Western figures, they all kind of refer to the Asian character of Russia as the source of their, why they're so barbaric and uncivilized, and why they can't be a part of our Europe. And so it was an ethnic issue all the way until after World War II. But then again, the Cold War was largely about ideology. So then all of this shifted into ideology. But after the Cold War, you do see sometimes the racist rhetoric emerge. But often you find in places like the Baltic states. Every now and then you have a politician who explains to us that it's because Russian women were raped by the Mongols that they still breed barbarians, this kind of stuff.
Wow.
And also it's a big problem in Ukraine, because for Ukraine they had the Ukrainians, the Belarusians, and the Russians, they all kind of have their civilizational cradle in Kievan Rus. And after the Kievan Rus fragmented in the 13th century, the eastern parts, which were the Russians, they were occupied right. by the Golden Hordes for 250 years, and so now when you listen to a lot of so the problem for Ukrainian nationalism is you've always been this very close to Russia, and this is like a double-edged sword, because if you're that close, yes, on one hand half the population believe you're brotherly people, and the other half are very worried that this is undermining your sovereignty, and that's a very reasonable position to have. If you want to be a sovereign country and you're identical to the Russians, well, why are you a separate country? So this is a real challenge. So the effort of establishing Ukrainian sovereignty, I can appreciate the difficulty in this. The problem is often within the nationalist elements in Ukraine, there's always been a strong racist aspect, which is because they're essentially arguing, well, we're not the same as the Russians. They are like the successors of the Mongols. They are Asians. We are Slavic whites. So we are the real successor of Kievan Rus, not these people. They're the successor of the Mongols. And this has kind of been, again, this is not all Ukrainians who thinks like this. This is the radical nationalist. But during for example World War II, Hitler found his main allies, in the Banderas and all these people who had the strongest ethnic nationalism. The problem is that they became kind of valuable for us fighters as we're trying to determine or fight for which side of the dividing lines in Europe Ukraine should be. So I seen even the former Prime Minister of Sweden, Carl Bildt, he went on Twitter. He posted this picture of orcs, this white knights, hacking down orcs, and he said, "Oh, in wartime, art can be a way of fighting." But the orc analogy they're using, this is linked to them being Asian. This is the argument. They're not white Slavs. They're not real Europeans. They're Asian people.
Right.
So I'm not sure if this Carl Bildt, these people know exactly what they're doing when they're referring to the Russians as orcs, but there is a concern that the ethnic component can of course come back. But the main reason why we do it, whether it's ethnicity or ideology, is always the same thing, because we need to divide. We have to divide into us versus them, and we assign stereotypes to it, because the world is complex. I mean, imagine every day you have hundreds, if not thousands, of minor interpretation to interpret the world around you. Even if you look at the world of politics, who understands everything in each continent? You need little mental shortcuts, filters to interpret everything. And the main propaganda we have now is everything is about freedom versus authoritarianism, democracy versus authoritarianism. No matter what happens in the world, this is the lens we're given, and we're told this is how we should interpret things. And this is the main, lens that we are using. So our publics will interpret things favorably, because if you think that the world is divided between authoritarians and liberal democracies, that this is the struggle of the world, then at worst, we might do the wrong thing, but we do it for the right reasons. The Russians, they might do the right thing, but for the wrong reason. So, for example, if we invade, Afghanistan or Iraq or Syria or Libya, whoever we attack, we did it for the right reasons, even though things went wrong. We just wanted to bring freedom and democracy. This is our motivation. If the Russians come in and do anything similar, even if it seems to have a good outcome, it's for the wrong reason. They want to build an empire. They just want to enslave people. They rob them of their democracy. So it's so reality doesn't really matter that much. If you're able to make people buy into the stereotypes of us versus them, which are defined by good versus evil, then again, the facts matter less. This is. But again, there's many great propaganda techniques, because you exploit weaknesses in human nature. For example, the human beings, we're very vulnerable to. Well, we confuse the familiar with truth. So if you say something often enough, this is a very common way of doing propaganda. Then it sounds familiar, so we believe that it's true. And before you talked about Russiagate, I mean, every aspect of that has been now proven to be fake. Was Trump, some secret Russian agent? No, of course not. That has been proven to be fake. How about the Hunter Biden laptop?
Mm-hmm.
That was a huge Russian conspiracy. No, well, that was proven as well. That was his Biden's laptop. Russia had absolutely nothing to do with it, which was obvious from day one. You had the same with these bounties, which Russia apparently put on on American troops in Afghanistan. Fake as well. And then, of course, Twitter. That was only like 2-3 weeks ago when they came out that all this huge Twitter manipulation, the Russian bots swinging the election, also fake. So, but that doesn't matter because it's fake after fake. But we were fed this all the time that Russia's trying to undermine our democracy. So it doesn't matter, even if all the stories have been fake. It's been repeated so many times. If you ask most people, like, well, why is Russia a threat? Oh, well, they're trying to undermine our democracy. They're trying to dismantle it. And as long as you can, and it doesn't matter if it's true, because you teach people to think in these cliches. They speak in cliches and slogans, and this is what the propaganda is supposed to achieve, and the opposite of having a rational discussion.
Yes. Okay. So the 300 years of demonization of Russia has been quite consistent over those centuries, and it's been across many different countries. Seems like to me that it's been generated, and this is where it's different, I believe, than other forms of racism and demonization. So like in the United States, anti-Black racism, its origins are from all over the place. I mean, a lot of it's bottom up, right? People just on their own decided that Black people were inferior. Some of it was, of course, generated by the government, but actually mostly it was sort of grassroots in a way, I would say. I don't think that's true with this. It's certainly not in the United States. No American ever thinks about Russian culture, people. I mean, they just, when asked, as you said, they will then parrot the line that the government tells them to. So it's generated, seems to me, by nation states, which also tells me that the demonization can't have always been truly, totally irrational, right? Because it's in that it must have always served a certain purpose, right? Or purposes. Now, I'm thinking two things. One is, it seems to me, and this is certainly what's going on nowadays, that there has been in European politics over the last 300 years, a sort of an ongoing movement that's cultural, political, and intellectual toward European integration, right? Not all Europeans have bought into that, but a very significant portion of the political class in Europe has, right? And pushed for European integration, which they've eventually got with the European Union. That impulse, that ideology that Europe should be one, that makes sense to me that it would come into conflict with Russia, which has generally speaking not been thrilled about playing that game of European Union for various reasons. But then I think about the Nazis who employed or deployed this sort of anti-Russian racism as much as anyone did. And they certainly weren't in favor of European integration. But it's certainly, I mean, it seems to me you have to look at sort of I think you have to look at the rational basis for the development of this demonization and racism towards Russia. Hasn't it always served some sort of geopolitical purpose?
Well, definitely. And again, if you look at British, there's been a lot of research, for example, into British Russophobia. And this is especially a lot of it about 60, 70 years ago. And the main, a lot of it popped up in the early 1800s. And part of the reason was, and actually, especially after Napoleon was defeated, because before then, the main rivalry had been for leadership in Europe between the French and the British. So once the French had been defeated, yes, the Russian beat them, but it became like a Pyrrhic victory because then the main opposition to the British was gone, and then that rivalry was over, and then their collective opposition could be directed towards Russia. So this is really when a lot of the propaganda or the Russophobia began, and a lot of the what's the word I'm looking for? But anyways, that's when most of the British propaganda against Russia, at least, began. And you're right, a lot of this has therefore rational calculations. I mean, but this is what propaganda does. You attempt to convince the public you have rational reasons for wanting to mobilize the public against an adversary, but you're mobilizing them by appealing to more instincts in human nature. So for example, and this is for this reason that people like Walter Lippmann, he argued that propaganda both had strengths and weaknesses. And well, he looked at the Russian Civil War after when the White Russians and the Red Russians were fighting after the Bolshevik Revolution, and he was pointing out, because the British, they got heavily involved in this, and in order to keep the war going and keep up public support, they were saying, oh, the Bolsheviks are losing at every corner, victory is coming our way, and they were telling all this, actually very similar to the war we're having now. You keep telling the story that the adversary is hopeless, he can't win, blah blah blah, and also he's not only is he hopeless, but he's also pure evil, of course. So the assumption is you shouldn't negotiate with pure evil, but you don't have to, because he's weak, he's stupid, and he's incompetent, so he will lose. And of course, it's fake. But then Walter Lippmann pointed out that the problem of this propaganda was once the Bolsheviks were winning, you really need to find a compromise start diplomacy. But how are you going to do this? Because now you just defined war as being between good versus evil. How are you going to negotiate with evil? And this was kind of his conclusion. If you use a lot of propaganda, portray everything as a conflict between good and evil, is great for mobilizing the masses. Of course, this is what you want, but it's terrible for a workable peace, because if there is a possibility for peace, it's now obstructed, because now, like, who would want to make a compromise with the devil? Peace is not made by compromising with evil. It's when good defeats evil. That's when you have peace. So this is kind of the cost of propaganda. And also, this was also seen after World War I. I mean, when America wanted to be able to join the war, this had to be portrayed as a war that will end all wars.
Right.
As a war to make the world safe for democracies. This was literally the last war we would ever fight again. But the problem is, once you define this conflict as being pure good versus pure evil, you could make a compromise with the Germans, and once they were defeated as well, you would do a crushing, humiliating win. And all that did, of course, was to give wind in the sail of some resentful German leaders. And of course, you have Adolf Hitler riding into power on this humiliation. So there is this cost and benefits to propaganda, but also cost as well. And I think, but anyways, my point was that this is employed for very rational reasons. It's a good way of communicating, but it's necessary for people to take a step back and realize how stupid it is. Well, it is, because always we're saying, here we are, we just want freedom for people, and we have a conflict in the world. This is a story every time we go to war, and there's an evil man on the other side. If we can just get rid of that evil man, this can be Milosevic or Gaddafi or Saddam Hussein, Putin, Xi Jinping, whoever we're in conflict with at the moment, and he's a very evil man. If we can get rid of him, then we'll have peace. This is the way you explain politics to children or fanatics. It doesn't. But the whole point is, it doesn't capture any nuance, the complexity. But that's the point. You simplify it, you dumb it down, and so you might have noticed every time we have a war, every time we have a conflict, it's always with the new Hitler, and it's always the 1930s, because this is the only book we have on the bookshelf. And the reason why we always go to this, reach for this, and this is propaganda, is because the assumption is, he's pure evil, we're good, victory will depend on, we have to mobilize against evil, there can be no compromise. And just to hammer that point in, is why we always have this reference to Munich, which you will always see the politicians make, no matter who we're in conflict with. Because Munich showed that if you make a compromise for peace, you will actually just set the stage for war. If you want peace, you have to destroy evil. This is it. So this is war propaganda. This is how it's worked. But again, people don't recognize it because they think propaganda is something, you know, state media of authoritarian states have a monopoly on. So it's very efficient the way
Yeah.
they communicate.
I would say in the West, the most important aspect of the demonization has been claims about the inherent imperialism of Russia, that its leaders, its political leaders at least, have always and inherently believed in and pursued expansion into other territories, other nation states, and that, of course, has required either the subversion of other foreign governments or direct military conflict, but the Russian is built to expand outward and to conquer the world. Now, of course, this is a gigantic topic, you know, Russian foreign policy over the last 300 years. But I mean, that part of the demonization, I'm sure you would agree, is not 100% false. I mean, before the Soviet Union, it was the Russian Empire, right? There certainly has been imperialism in Russia. And during the Soviet period, the Soviet Union, you know, this is a very complex conversation, you know, people can have, and people like George Kennan, of course, have been very important in this. But was the Soviet Union expansionist? Was it imperialist? Was it actively seeking to overthrow governments around the world and replace them with communist governments? Yes and no, but I'd actually kind of like to hear your point on that. I mean, and then of course, Putin emerges from the Soviet Union. He was a major figure in the KGB, no less. And so the claim is, well, Putin sort of inherited that good old Russian expansionism that was, you know, clear in the Soviet Union. What would you say to someone who would bring that up, the history of Russian imperial adventures, as evidence that it is part of the Russian character?
Well, Russia is the biggest country, has the biggest territory in the world of all countries, and of course, this is through conquest. So saying that there's a propaganda does mean that Russia hasn't had an expansionist history as well. Again, my point is that that it's one element of Russian foreign policy that they've had an expansionist past. But again, the point of propaganda is to remove all other nuance and make that the only aspect. In other words, when we have a conflict, we never discuss that we have national interests we're pursuing, you know, oil or territory or anything else or economic interest. Is we were doing it for values, you know, freedom, democracy. This is why we fight, and we do the same with Russia. We don't even talk about them as a country. We call Russia Putin. You know, it's just one man who's really, really bad, and also you know, they have this expansionist genes. But Russia's history has always been difficult. Again, it was severed from Europe by the invasion of the Mongols for 250 years. They've been invaded by Poland, Sweden, Germany again, of course, France. They always had a huge invasion, and they always lost a huge amount of people during this. And there's been I would say if not most historians would always also have this consensus that ever since the days of Vladimir the Terrible, you know, you had effectively what they called defensive expansionism, if you will. That is, they were often undeliberate. It was not necessarily intentional or planned, because they had all these open spaces which made them very vulnerable to invasions. There's not necessarily any lakes or mountain ranges, anything that would create a natural barrier. So what they often saw is the first main expansion they did was after they, you know, threw away the Tatar yoke, and they were able to, you know, free themselves of Tatar, imperialism or colonization of Russia. They still have the Tatar kingdoms on the outskirts of what was then, you know, the Russian states, and those was the first one they invaded. I think they invaded Kazan in 1552 or 53. Anyways, this was kind of the first impulse, and then they were able to defeat, these hostile powers at the periphery who had occupied them for hundreds of years, and this kind of secured this region. But then once you have this region, in order to have it secured, you have to control the periphery of this, and then gradually it begins to expand. And but again, there's been many reasons for Russian for Russian expansion, but also a key one has been the desire to have buffers, and this is why. For example, after the Cold War, you had this. After the Cold War, you had this theory, which was quite popular in Russia, which is called Island Russia. The idea was that maybe it's a good thing now that we gave up these territories in the West and all, because now we become effectively an island like the United States, who doesn't have any immediate threats on their borders because all our neighbors are weak, and so we shouldn't want to have put these people under our rule, because now we can relax within our own borders. No one's standing on our borders. But then, the main criticism of this theory was, well, what if the West starts to expand towards us? And well, then we're going to have a problem. And well, then probably we will go back into a Cold War. And so this has been the problem. And I would argue that this idea that Russia's just hungry for territory, it's not based on any strong evidence, because definitely throughout its imperial history, like all other European countries, I would say, has had imperial impulses. But after the Cold War, Russia made itself very comfortable within its existing borders. On the contrary, the ones who had no natural borders, by definition, was NATO, saying that the door is always open. We're going to always continue to expand, no limits. And this has been the main concern for the Russians. Same as with this conflict from 2014. No one in Moscow was talking about taking Crimea. And the idea that they just woke up one day and decided to annex Crimea out of nowhere, it's even Michael McFaul, like one of the worst anti-Russian hawks there are, the king of anti-Russian propaganda, he recognizes that they wouldn't have taken this. This was a reaction because they saw the West supporting the toppling of Yanukovych. They saw us coming down the line. Obviously, we were going to put anti-Russians in power. They were going to push the Russians out of their naval base, their Black Sea Fleet in Sevastopol in Crimea, and eventually those would be replaced by US and NATO troops. So Russia took a decision. They annexed it. Again, I'm not saying that conforms with international law or anything like this, or if it was the right thing to do. I'm just saying this was a reaction. They responded. In other words, and this is why we keep referring to Russia as expansionist and revisionist, but this is what a status quo power does. It holds the position it already has, and it had a base in Crimea. It saw this being threatened by NATO, so it annexed it to be able to control this territory themselves. I mean, we did the same in Georgia when Georgia attacked South Ossetia and killed all the Russian peacekeepers. The Russian army intervened. All our media, they're going to conquer all of Georgia and then annex it and recreate the Soviet Union. This assumption that they're hungry for an empire. Well, they didn't. They preserved the status quo. Again, is it in line with international law? No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying they had their peacekeepers in South Ossetia. They pushed out the Georgians and they kept that position. So that's what a status quo power does, and it doesn't conform, because every time we have some conflict like this, always the assumption is, they just want to conquer a territory, they want to annex it. But that's why I said this war as well now is not primarily about territory. In 2014, a lot of nationalists in Russia said, "Well, why don't we take Donbass? We should help them too, so they're not, mistreated." Because obviously the new government we installed was not very favorable to ethnic Russians and Russian speakers. Well, people like Putin were against it. He said, no, this we have to stay within these existing borders. And again, this is what they try to do. They wanted to negotiate a neutral a neutral Ukraine. When they didn't get it, that's when they decide to invade. And that's why I always say now it's so dangerous what NATO's saying. They keep saying, well, as soon as this war is over, we're going to let Ukraine into NATO. Well, if you're in Russia and you think that Ukraine is going to join NATO, you would want to strip it of all strategic territories and resources which NATO can use. I mean, it shouldn't have a coastline. You shouldn't have any of those economic profitable regions. And this is a horrible thing to do to Ukraine, to say to the Russians, oh, we're going to use this territory, we're going to expand here, and whatever territory is here, we're going to use against you in the future. Well, you're just giving a huge incentive for Russia to wreck the place and to take what they want. So it's again, it's not in conformity with international law. It's not expansionist or revisionist in terms of the motivation. The motivation is to preserve the status quo, keep the external threats away from Russian borders. So, no, I always have this. I'm always critical of the way it's. They have this genetic impulse for expansion. I find it.
Yes.
Weak
So,
argument.
yes. So I take your argument to mean that the problem with Russophobia in the West, which is dominant in the West, is that anytime Russia does take military action against another country, anytime it does expand, as it did into Eastern Ukraine recently, we are not allowed in the West to explain that in any other way but to say, well, it's because they're Russian. I mean, I can't even tell you how many times I've heard experts say this. Well, it's what Russians do. Oh, it's the Ruskies. Of course they're doing this. Of course they're attacking Ukraine. They're Russians. I mean, that is truly the sum total of the argument as to the cause of Russia's actions in foreign relations. That's the problem, right? Is that it disallows any other possible explanation for why Russia does what it does. Right?
Yeah, no, and that's also, if you want to see why we might be propagandized in the West. The main, we don't have to listen to Russia, but let's listen to the world outside of the West, because no one is buying it. And this is why, when American or European politicians go to, lecture Latin America or Africa or Asia about, why they have to join this anti-Russian campaign, because no one's joining it. No one's joining in on the sanctions. They're not sending weapons. It's only, people, 85% of the world living in countries who are not doing this. And the reason is, it's not that they support Russia's invasion. It's just that they see this as being also, they don't want to support NATO's war against Russia either. And they're not buying this rhetoric. So, for example, when you have Blinken going down to South Africa and saying, hey, listen, how can you support, this is a violation of sovereignty? And they very openly said, well, you can't just suddenly start to care about sovereignty. I mean, why is this so different from what, for example, NATO or the United States did in, what they did towards Yugoslavia, Afghanistan, Iraq, what is it, about 1 million people dead, Libya, all this, Yemen, I mean, all these horrible wars with all these people killed, wars of aggression, and most of them actually unprovoked. Why was this okay? Well, it goes back to this idea. Well, when we did it, it was maybe the wrong thing, but for the right reasons, because we did it for democracy and freedom, and Russia does it for empire. So it's it's always this assumption about this effectively having this evil intention. And it's very hard to have the discussions because you're trying to explain, no, well, I don't have to necessarily agree with what Russia has done, but I don't agree to this diagnosis which they give about why Russia did it. I find it to be absurd, and I don't think it's helpful either. I think it's a very dangerous narrative then when everything's presented as good versus evil, because then again, you have to fight to the end. There can't be any compromise. So I notice it here as well. Whenever I try to explain what Russia's doing, they're saying, well, if you're explaining it, then you're legitimizing it. And if you're legitimizing it, then you're a puppet of Putin, and well, you should pretty much never work in this country again.
Right.
This is how they tend to silence people. And it's quite an absurd argument, because if you can't explain what the adversary is doing, then what can you possibly do? And this makes my job completely impossible, because my main research is in Russian foreign policy. If you study anyone's foreign policy or security policy, then the first thing you do is, if I would study, for example, Norwegian security policy, what threatens Norway? How do we respond?
Mm-hmm.
But when we deal with Russia, no one's threatening them, because NATO is not a threat to anyone.
Right.
I mean, if
It's
we expand
defensive.
the world's largest alliance, it can't be a threat. We're bombing other countries who never threatened us. We say, oh, no, but we're a defensive alliance. I mean, we have these slogans which are immune to facts, and the same applies with Russia. You can't whatever you try to explain, it's you end up being accused of legitimizing something.
That's right.
So it's
according to Russophobic culture, Russia has no legitimate national security interests. None. They're never expressed by the foreign policy establishment that Russia has any legitimate national security interests. Everything they do in foreign relations is driven by this innate evil. The other thing that's not allowed.
Very quickly.
Yes.
Because that one point that is at the heart of the problem we have. Because I mean, open any newspaper in US or Europe, you will never read about a discussion about Russian security concerns or legitimate interests. And this is quite extraordinary, because how can you possibly explain anything in the country if you don't know what its security concerns are?
Right.
But again, you can't. If you do refer to them, then you're legitimizing what Russia's doing. So our solution is never to discuss anything of what's Russian national security interests or its concerns.
Right.
And this is absurd, because now how are you going to explain anything Russia does? Well, because if it has no legitimate interest and we can't be a threat to anyone, then everything has to happen in a vacuum. It has to be internal because of their character.
Yep.
So it's like, well, Putin is very evil, or they're just Russians, they always want more territory, or they want to restore the Soviet Union. It's always something internally occurring in a vacuum, something wrong with them. It never responds to anything from outside. So it's unprovoked, everything they do, because they have no legitimate interest. So this is why the propaganda is very harmful, because if you can't admit that your opponents have an interest, how are you going to explain what the hell they're doing?
Exactly.
Unless they're just acting out of pure evil. And that's our, always conclusion.
The other thing that Russophobia does is it disallows Russia from having a history. You are not allowed to talk about the history behind any conflict. So I'm sure you've noticed that there has not been one single mention, really, that's an exaggeration, but basically there's no mention of anything prior to February 24th, 2022 in discussions of Ukraine. You are not really, if you do take the discussion back before February 24th of 2022, you are accused of being a Putin propagandist, of course. You are not allowed ever to contextualize, meaning explain historically why Russia is doing what it's doing. You're only allowed to discuss it in terms of the innate Russian character. And history, as I've said many times, if Americans actually knew the history just from 2014 to 2022, just that, I can't imagine that many Americans would want to support Ukraine in this war. I just don't see that. And this, of course, this is why they don't allow the history, but it's also because of this Russophobia. They can get away with it because most Americans who ever think about this just assume, well, they're Ruskies, they're orcs, this is what they do. We therefore have to fight them.
Yeah, and that is the problem, that you see the newspapers or news agencies. They only speak in these cliches about these orcs coming for territory, so you always have this the narrative which people are given is that you have this Ukraine who always lived under in the shadow of the Russian imperialists. Now they're really trying to finally break free, reach out to the West and their dreams of freedom. And of course the Russians will not permit this, so they're crushing them. And it's a again lovely narrative, good versus evil. It's good for mobilizing the people, and it's quite efficient because you have to admit, well, once Russia invaded, no, people who never heard of really Ukraine or knows where it is on the map, everyone suddenly overnight, they felt very confident that they knew exactly what was going on because they have this mental shortcut. They're given this lens to interpret everything. Well, so anyone can be an expert on anything because we already know that this is a struggle between freedom and democracy versus authoritarianism. People don't actually know any of the facts, and that's kind of the point. You're not supposed to know. For example, do most people know that from 1991, when they became an independent country, to 2014, hardly any Ukrainians actually wanted to join NATO? It was usually around 20%. Right. NATO defined this as a problem because they said, well, they don't want to join our country. They don't want to join NATO. What are we going to do? The government has made neutrality law. Well, how are we going to deal with this? And then, we assisted in destabilizing the government at the end of 2013, early 2014. And we say, well, this was for pro-democracy. It was, for helping Ukrainians. But the Ukrainians actually put forward a proposal to the West, going, listen, don't make us choose. How about we have an agreement between, the EU, Russia, and Ukraine? That way we don't have to choose, because Ukrainians didn't want to choose between East and West. And if they had to choose, most people favored Russia. So this is reality. These are facts, but they don't fit into the narrative. But nonetheless, when Ukraine was asked to choose, they chose not to go with the European Union. They decided instead to work closer with Russia. So we backed a coup. However, we don't call it a coup. We call it a democratic revolution because, again, this is also what propaganda means. You create new language. We don't interfere in domestic affairs. We promote democracy. We don't invade countries. We have humanitarian interventions, and we don't topple governments. Support democratic revolutions. But if you look at it, why was it a democratic revolution? I mean, Yanukovych was elected democratically, in a free and fair election, according to the OSCE as well. Mm-hmm. And yes, he was corrupt, like the ones before him and the ones after him. Did the majority of Ukrainians actually support his toppling? No, even the BBC recognized this. Even the protests, the mere protests against him at Maidan didn't have a majority of Ukrainians supporting it. Mm-hmm. Did it breach the Ukrainian constitution? What we did? Yeah, of course it did. This is not how the constitution works. You can't just remove him from power like this. So across the board, it doesn't matter. There was nothing democratic about it. But again, the lens is still there. Who's going to say that the West versus Russia, that democracy and freedom is not on our side? Because these stereotypes are very much built very deeply in. So so I see now, instead of, and this is why I'm so annoyed when I hear propaganda, because we always use it to monopolize on the narrative. But all the experts on propaganda in the past, they wrote, the main thing to resolve propaganda, if we're arguing that the Russians are propagandizing us, let's have an open discussion. Let's I think it was Bertrand Russell who said, we should have debate between Churchill and Stalin, like having them open, have no one manipulating their messages. This is the antidote to propaganda. And we don't do that. Instead, we establish these ministries of truth, fact checkers. Right. So the EU fact checker, for example, says, well, no, there wasn't a coup in Ukraine in 2014. It was a democratic revolution. That's not a fact. You're not checking a fact. You're checking a narrative. Mm-hmm. And, so then the facts would be, was it in accordance with constitution? Did it have democratic support? Was Yanukovych democratically elected? This would be facts you can answer, but we don't. So instead we check narratives based on, ideology. So no one's benefiting from this. That's my point.
Yeah. Absolutely. So let's talk about Vladimir Putin specifically, and let's talk about some specific claims made against him in the West. So when you hear mainstream journalists refer to Putin, almost always one of the first things they'll say is, well, he's killed political dissidents and journalists. And they might list some of them, it's about half a dozen or so, maybe 10. Anti-Putin people who have been poisoned, who have been shot, who have disappeared. various things. One of them, it was claimed he was killed by Putin, and then he turned up alive at a press conference later. But you want to talk about, I mean, this is one of the it's one of my favorite stories in your book. Oh, and by the way, one of the great data points in your book, referring to what you just said, is that the public opinion polls on Ukrainians before 2014 that showed most of them did not want to join NATO, and was actually conducted by Gallup, the Gallup organization. So, you know, not a pro-Putin outfit. But let's talk about Putin, the murderer, the assassin. Who has he killed people? Has he poisoned these poor dissidents, these freedom fighters in Russia, who now we have Academy Award winning films about, you know, referring to Alexei Navalny. Talk about Litvinenko, the Skripals, Khodorkovsky, this Babchenko guy who died and didn't die. What's the truth here?
Well, Russia has had many journalists and dissidents who have been killed. Well, the interesting part is everything is always connected to Putin. Again, we don't even talk about Russia as a country. This is one of the problems when everything is simplified into Putin. You assume that Putin's sitting on top. Anything bad that happens in the country is somehow, you know, the president of the Russian Federation ordering hits on journalists. This is, it's quite an absurd proposition. And the thing is, of course, you had many problems in Russia. The lack of democracy meant that it never had a very strong democratic culture in terms of, viewing political opposition as an enemy. This is dangerous. That's when you have political violence as well. But as we saw after the Soviet Union collapsed, there was a lot of journalists who were killed. But more during Yeltsin's time, and it declined during Putin's time. But what are we saying? Are we saying all the journalists who got killed under Yeltsin's time was, the Yeltsin ordered hits on all of them? Or, this is, again, it becomes a story for children and fanatics that, this is the reason why you have political violence in Russia. It's nothing about the political culture. It's nothing about the anarchy that, consumed Russia in the 1990s when there was lawlessness and the complete chaos. Then these are not the issues we're discussing. Instead, we're always going to this one answer. Well, who's the bad guy who's sitting in the Kremlin? And it's it's a very it's a very simplistic narrative. Not just simplistic narrative. It's sorry, it's very much fake. It's not everything is about Putin, but we kind of Putinized Russia, and this is a key weakness.
So what really happened with Alexei Navalny? I take it you don't believe him?
Well, I'm skeptical. Again, I think that he had an important role. He became first famous as a blogger who was revealing a lot of propaganda, a lot of corruption within the Russian state. Government officials, but also business leaders, and he was running, and he's running his blog and all, and exposing a lot of this. And I think that's an important role to have. But then, of course, when he have more political, political aspirations, I think he very quickly became a less reliable force, I would say. And also I think that he was to a large extent used by a lot of by the West, because we always look for the dissidents in Russia and we want to make them into these superheroes. I mean, with Navalny, for example, he was, the way he's portrayed is quite strange. I mean, his main argument was like many other Democrats in the 90s, which was, Russia's always been this multi-ethnic state full of nationalities. If you're going to have a democracy, you need a demos, a nation first. So he said, "Oh, this is a great opportunity. We're now only white Slavs. Why are all these Central Asians coming into Russia?" So compared them to cockroaches, and joked about killing them, all this very xenophobic stuff. He never distanced himself from this, by the way. I mean, that doesn't mean that it still can't be that everything about him is evil. I'm just saying the way we kind of whitewashed him, I thought was quite interesting. But you also see whenever the United States releases reports, for example, through for example, the Rand report is a very interesting report from 2019, how the United States aims to weaken Russia over a longer period of time. The different ways of destabilizing Russia, both externally and internally. Within, they specifically list that they have to work with dissidents inside to provide, and try to acquire damaging information about Russia, put it in the hands of these dissidents, and then, to make it more legitimate. And again, this is also a key tool of propaganda, is you need source credibility. You can't just have American or Western intelligence agencies coming out with damaging evidence. You want to filter it through dissidents to build up, these rivals, these opposition groups. But the story behind, now I can't remember all the details, but the story behind Navalny, I thought that was my main reason for doubting him, because it was just a story that changed so many times. As we all remember, he got poisoned. Well, first it was he became ill on a domestic flight, and then the narrative was that they tried to kill him. They didn't run him over with a car or have him shot or anything like this. Instead, they poisoned him, apparently at an airport, with a very toxic chemical. And then the story changed a few times. First, it was put in his tea, but then you had CCTV cameras there, and then they had to change it to his water bottle, and then that didn't work either. So then at the end, third time's a charm. It appeared that the poison was in his underpants, and when he was unconscious from this, the Russia poisoned him a second time. But then, he made this. They made an emergency landing after, of course, poisoning Navalny at an airport and an airplane. Threatening a lot of the causing huge chaos and death on a Russian airport, because Russians don't care about this. Apparently, they rushed him to a state hospital, and all the doctors, they save his life. So we're told that they must have falsified his psychology tests, and when he's lying there at the hospital, having severe health problems, instead of putting a pillow over his head or killing him, they approve his transfer to a German hospital. I mean, it was just it was a lot of strange coincidences. I mean, it is possible. I can't say that. I don't know whether or not this wonderful narrative is true or not. I'm not gonna, I don't know. But my criticism, or what the focuses on, is the propaganda aspect, and no one looked at this weird, this very strange narrative about how this crisis, how this poisoning happened, and why Russia would do any of the things they were we said that they did. And that was my main criticism. So again, maybe it's all true. I have no reason to know. I don't have any way to know. But my point is how the media deals with these issues. That was kind of the main the main focus. So we whitewash everything. We create these fantastic narratives, even though they're very suspicious. And but again, it's the same with this Nord Stream thing. I mean, this is it's just insane narrative, and no media wants to talk about it, because if they talk about it, they have to say how ridiculous it is. So we decided not to talk about it, and this is kind of what happened with Navalny as well. But no, it's there's a few stories like that in book examples. again, I just want to make clear because it's always assumed that I'm trying to, help working on behalf of the Russian state to attack Navalny. No, not at all. I think that as a blogger and all, he did important work. But I'm not buying this story. Not the way the media told it, at least, because it's many strange twists and turns.
And then there's this Skripals, anti-Putin Russian dissidents in the UK who were allegedly poisoned in 2018. And that story is even flimsier, right? And turns out there's virtually no evidence to support this, that they were poisoned by the Russian government, right?
Yeah, that's also, again, Novichok. That's how you know it's evil. The same chemical used against Navalny. So that was former double agent Sergei Skripal and also his daughter. They were allegedly poisoned with Novichok. Again, one of the most deadly chemicals in the world. But it didn't kill Navalny. It didn't kill the Skripals either. So it's a bit strange that it doesn't seem to work very well. But it is one of the most poisonous chemicals. So, well, it was a lot of coincidence, I guess. First of all, it was said that there was poison on the door handle at home, and then when they touched it, instead of dying immediately, they walked around for a few hours. They had lunch, and then they went to a park bench. And then once they reached the park bench, they both passed out exactly at the same time after a few hours. So no one could run for help. They both passed out exactly the same time, which is strange because they're different age, different gender, different weight, different health, but still, after several hours of touching this chemical, they both pass out at the same time. Then they suddenly discovered by a nurse. No one tells us who this nurse is. Then again, after a few months, it discovered that that the person who happened to find them in the park was none other than Colonel Alison McCourt. She's a chief nurse of the British Army. Also, I think a specialist in chemical. I don't know, chemical warfare, but yes,
what a coincidence.
What they're inflicted with. So it's right next to Porton Down as well, one of the oldest or the oldest chemical warfare research installation in the world. So it's a lot of. I think for 10 months, the British kept the identity of McCourt hidden, and again, it's interesting. I'm not saying maybe these are all wonderful coincidences, but it becomes a bit strange. But also there's some lyings, like for example, Boris Johnson. He claimed that Porton Down chemical lab, they had told him that this nerve agent had a Russian origin. And that was later on, even that same lab said, no, we never said that. That's fake. So they are caught lying at times. Again, doesn't mean that everything is a lie. But there's also other strange things. Like before they passed out, both of the Skripals, they turned off their phones with the GPS. That's a weird thing to do right before you pass out after being poisoned with a chemical. And again, I have a lot of questions. The media should have a lot of questions when asking the Skripals, because interestingly, they didn't die. But they're never heard from again. No one knows where they are. They said, they have to go into secret hiding because the Russians might come for them again. But if you don't want the conspiracy theories or strange questions, it would be nice to let the media meet them, or at least have a press conference. But they never heard from again. It is very strange. And this other, it's been a while, I can't remember all, but there's also minor issues like Trump didn't want to take actions against Russia, but then apparently the deputy CI director, she had shown Trump pictures of all these dead ducks and hospitalized children, because the Skripals have been in the park and been feeding ducks, and they have all been poisoned. So this was how he was convinced that he should take actions against Russia. There are no kids who are hospitalized, and there's no dead ducks. So it's very strange. I don't understand. So I have a lot of questions, and I would like if the Skripals were allowed to speak to the media, but they're not. Right. And so again, I'm not saying something happens, something doesn't happen. I just want to look at the facts. Well, what can we say for certain? I can't say if this story was fake or true. I just know that the way the media has handled it is far from worthy of trust, I guess.
Right. You're not allowed to ask these questions. You're not allowed to be. Skepticism is not allowed. That's the problem.
If you question the way the media handles this, then you're trying to murky the waters. You're working now for the Kremlin. You're attacking dissidents. They've already been poisoned by Putin, and now you're trying to attack their credibility. I mean, this is the things that happens if you question any of these stories which we are given.
Right. So you do a great job, as I said, of sort of listing or discussing all the ways in which the West has demonized Putin since he took power 2 decades ago. But you miss one thing, Glenn, and I think that's because you don't. I think it's because you don't live here. I think if you lived here, you would have known this. The first thing that the ordinary American liberal knew about Putin was what? That he was anti-gay. That has been used. Oh, I mean, my friends who knew nothing about politics, this is about 10 years ago. The Sochi Olympics, it really took off right around then, 2014. That's when all my friends here who are not political at all started talking about Vladimir Putin and how he hated gay people. And they got in their minds that this guy was just inherent. In the liberal American mind, homophobia is only what evil people believe. And that has been used again and again and again to mobilize sort of normie liberal opinion, at least in this country, against Putin. And it's been used very much so to justify support for Ukraine in this war. I don't know if you...
Well, it's there was, especially around the Sochi Olympics when this was a big issue. But again, I remember the media reports that you got the impression that gays were hunted down for sports almost. But the thing is, if you go to big cities, be it St. Petersburg or Moscow, there's gay clubs people can go to. It's not as if they deny that gays exists or it's they had they had a law which they passed, which was that you shouldn't glorify or promote homosexuality,
to children,
around children.
Right.
And I have to, I was also I was critical of that law, because one of the things that a key way that gays are stereotyped are, you put them in the same category as pedophiles, for example. Right. So once you say, protect children from the gays or something, immediately, everyone should be a bit cautious. Like, this is not, where are you going with this? Because that's a common way of demonizing gays. But I have to admit, though, after 10 years later, when you see the way that all this transgender stuff is promoted to children at and not just in the US but also in Europe. Videos from Netherlands where they're discussing gender, so you can choose your own gender, and you're telling little 4-year-olds in daycare. It's I think that I would like to see. I think it's a concerning development, though, that you have promoting a lot of the sexual material to children. But again, the so-called gay laws, or not promoting homosexuality to children, either if you're for it or against it, I'm a bit critical of such laws.
Me too.
But that's not how, but again, that's not how it was presented. That was my point, because they made it sound like homosexuality was illegal. I think that the Russian army, for example, permitted gays or open gays before the US army. I have to check that date, but I think by a few years. So anyways, my point is just that it's misrepresented, and in order to try to demonize Russia. So you had all this, but this is a part of what they called politics of Olympics, because Olympics is an opportunity for some country to show how much they developed or advanced, or to show themselves off to the world, and their adversaries will do whatever you can to tear them down. So ahead of the Olympics, that some scandals will be to some extent manufactured. So, but yeah, no, the homosexual aspect, yeah, that's
big thing here. It's a very big thing for America.
Whenever you see, for example, military bases now, or I think it was Anthony Blinken who tweeted out like putting up a LGBT flag outside a US embassy, and I think
yep.
If that comes from a place of compassion and understanding for a marginalized group, wonderful.
Sure.
But you can feel that this is going to be a tool,
exactly.
A tool in the foreign policy. How they're going to pressure and demonize other countries. So, but again, no, I again, by all means, criticize the way the Russian government portrays or what laws they have towards gays, but
sure.
but be a little bit more honest about it. That's my concern.
Right.
But I did enjoy some of the protests, though. I saw some in front of some American gay bars, they were pouring out Stolichnaya vodka in protest, right. Even though I think that's Latvian vodka, which was amusing to me. But,
what's the difference? Who cares? Well, so 300 years of Russophobia, what do we do about it? I'd like to end it. I don't know if that's possible in my lifetime, but what should we do besides make podcasts and write books? How do we open the Western mind to think about Russia in a more nuanced way, to be curious? Really, that's what it is. It's a lack of curiosity about Russia and about Putin. People don't want to ask questions. They're not interested in pursuing what's really going on in Russia. They are, as you've been saying, they already have these preset notions. How do we somehow intervene there and maybe stop? To me, I think it's really about the conversation between the foreign policy establishment in the West and the media and then the people. It's that three-part relationship, because, as I said, almost all this Russophobia, at least in America, comes from the nation state. I mean, we know the CIA through Operation Mockingbird is feeding information to the newspapers and the major media outlets. We know this. We know that CNN and the New York Times parrot what the CIA's line is, what the State Department's line is. And then, unfortunately, and most Americans aren't completely unaware of anything outside. I mean, you know how horribly ignorant and parochial Americans are. I mean, they know next to nothing about the world outside the United States. So it's very easy to feed them information, false and misinformation about other countries. And we saw this with Iraq very plainly. The demonization of Saddam was off the charts, and that, of course, justified this ridiculous invasion, which resulted in the deaths of millions of people. So what do we do? How do we intervene in the American, in the Western mind?
I kind of miss the Mockingbird days. At least then the intelligence agencies had the decency to do this covertly. These days, you have CNN, MSNBC, they're actually hiring people like John Brennan and
right.
James Clapper to actually be commentators on the show. So they're actually putting the right. intelligence officers to disseminate the news. Even though part of their job description is disinformation, you're putting them as political analysts, hiring them to disseminate the news. So there's no way. This hiding plain sight thing is I don't care for it much. But no, well, I think because propaganda is to a large extent about appealing to the irrational. I think that the reason is or knowledge is the most important thing. People have to be a bit educated and be able to deal with these issues rationally, instead of just and also recognizing that people are trying to exploit them by going for their impulses. Or for example, you mentioned Iraq. One of the key ways they were pushing this through is they kept mentioning Osama bin Laden and Saddam Hussein in the same sentence.
Mm-hmm.
This makes of course they couldn't really make the explicit argument that they're in cahoots, because it's ridiculous. I mean, they wanted to kill each other pretty much. So it wouldn't make any sense. But if you keep talking about September 11, 9/11, and Saddam Hussein in the same sentence all the time, people start to make this connection. And if I'm not mistaken, on the eve of America's invasion of Iraq, most Americans thought that Saddam Hussein had a role in 9/11.
Yes.
So it is a strange thing, because it doesn't make any sense. Like, no one would ever make that argument, because it's absurd. But it just shows that if you just connect these words together and repeat it enough, it sticks in people's heads. And so sometimes you don't even have to lie. You just because if you say it out loud, it's kind of stupid. But you just keep putting these words together. So if people know how easy it is to be manipulated, then perhaps they would have better defenses against it. And so yeah, that would be, again, also part of my motivation for writing this book, is trying to explain to people exactly what is it that what propaganda actually is, because it's thrown around so often. And I often find that the best way to help people to realize how they're being manipulated is related to something they know. And I think that would be marketing, because everyone knows what marketing is. Well, propaganda is the marketing of politics. And if we talk about, you see advertisements every day, you know that if you're advertising a car or clothes, not selling, to stay warm or transportation, you're selling status symbols, you're selling sex. And this is the same thing with propaganda. You're selling politics as something else. And this is why it was probably started with, but that's why it's important to recognize that the father of propaganda was Edward Bernays. Also, his uncle was Sigmund Freud, by the way, which is why he learned so much about exploiting group psychology. But this shows how marketing and propaganda is linked, because he did work in marketing. He was able to promote the cigarettes to women because it was not very feminine, and then he marketed it as torches of freedom. So again, you're not selling nicotine or tobacco, you're selling something else, the empowerment of women, freedom, right, democracy. This is what you're selling. This is why people smoking. And and after that, he also worked for the US government. And then, at the time when Guatemala was promoting a lot of workers' rights, and this was not good for United Fruit Company. So, they fired Edward Bernays. He's trying to portray the president there, Arbenz, as a communist, looking to, communists creeping on on America's border, fighting your freedoms. Again, he was a capitalist, very much so, a liberal one as well. So there was it's all nonsense. But again, people believe, there's a communist threat in Guatemala, we have to help them, just like the torches of freedom. And then the United States toppled the government and crushed the workers' rights. So again, this is how propaganda usually works. There's no facts. You sell stereotypes about us and them. So this is what I try to explain to people. And I don't know how to. I'm not sure how to pull this back. I would argue there's a need to have more openness, more ideally debates. I mean, I would like to see Biden and Putin have a discussion. Like, wouldn't that be wonderful? We all accuse each other of propaganda. Wow. Imagine Biden and Putin can stand next to each other. This is our perspective. This is our perspective. Where do we disagree? Where can we agree? What can be done? This would be a nice exchange. I mean, where the information isn't manipulated. But but sadly, I mean, even during the Cold War, we knew kind of what the Soviet argument was. We knew what Moscow was saying. But now, we even censoring their media. We're so afraid that people, will hear their arguments, and it will disturb our narrative. So again, their media is censored. Anyone who's suggesting that there's a flaw in our argument, is presented as being Russian agents. At least I've been called Russian propagandist more than once, and this is just how it works. So I really don't know. Either governments would have to see it as no longer in the interest of continuing this forever conflict, 300 years now with Russia, or people would have to start to recognize how governments manipulate narratives and language. And no, I wish in my book I don't have any optimistic conclusion about how to end propaganda, unfortunately.
Well, I mean, I have a suggestion. I think a great way to start is to read your book, and everyone should. So it's available on Amazon, I believe. Russophobia by Glenn Diesen. Also, you are on YouTube. You have your own channel, and you conduct your own interviews, many of which are with major figures like Doug McGregor and others. And then you're also a frequent guest on the Duran, and that's where I discovered you. I think you've been on there, I don't know, many, many times. Everyone, please take a look at Glenn's work and watch him on YouTube and get the word out about this. This is really what is standing between us and world war. And at this point, I don't see any other way around it. If Americans and Westerners continue to think this way about Russia, we're headed in one direction, which is toward war, direct war with them. So Glenn, thank you for everything that you've done, all the work you've done. Thank you for informing me so much. I've been so educated by what you've done, and thanks for being on the show.
Oh, my pleasure. Anytime.
All right. This is the Unregistered Podcast, and I'm Thaddeus Russell. To become a patron of the show and have access to bonus episodes, AMAs, and the Unreported News Analysis Show, go to patreon.com/unregistered. Thanks for listening.